order. Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Routley, and I'm the MLA for Nanaimo North Cowichan Committee on Reforming the Police Act, an all-party committee of the Legislative Assembly. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining today's meeting from the traditional territories of the Malahat First Nation. I would also like to welcome all those who are listening and participating to this meeting. Our committee is undertaking a broad consultation with respect to policing and public safety in BC. We are taking a phased approach to this work and have been meeting with subject matter experts, community advocacy organizations, Indigenous communities, and others. We also invite British Columbians to provide written, audio, or video submissions. We will review those submissions with a view to inviting individuals and organizations to present to the committee at a later date. Further details on how to participate are available on our website at www.leg.bc.ca/CMT/RPA. The deadline for submissions is 5 p.m. on Friday, April 30th. For these meetings, the presenters have been organized into small panels. Today, we will be discussing advocacy and support services. Each presenter has 15 minutes to speak, and we kindly ask presenters to be respectful of the time limit. Following presentations from the panel, there will be time for questions from committee members. At that time, I ask members to raise their hand to indicate they have a question, and we will keep a speaking list. I also ask that everyone please put themselves on mute and wait until you're recognized before speaking. All audio from our meetings is broadcast live on our website, and a complete transcript will be posted. Further introductions now. I'd like to introduce the members of the committee. I'll call on each one. MLA Kirkpatrick.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'd like to acknowledge I'm on the traditional lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam First Nations. My name is Corinne Kirkpatrick, and I'm the MLA for West Vancouver Capilano, and looking forward to hearing from you all today.
And MLA Olson.
Good morning, Adam Olson, coming to you from beautiful Chocolate in the Saanich Territory, and I'm the MLA for Saanich North and the Islands.
And MLA Singh.
Good morning, joining you from the Coast Salish territories of Kwantlen, Ketsi, and Semiahmoo First Nations, and I'm MLA for Surrey Green Timbers. Thank you.
And MLA and Deputy Chair Dan Davies.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Dan Davies. I'm the MLA for Peace River North. I live in Fort St. John, but I'm coming to you today from Victoria, territory of the Lekwungen people. So, welcome.
And Mr. Begg.
Good morning, everyone. I'm joining you today from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Kwantlen, Katsi, and Semiahmoo First Nations. I am the MLA for Surrey Guildford.
And MLA Sandhu.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I am Harvinder Sandhu, MLA for Vernon Monashi, and today I'm joining you from Victoria. It's unceded and traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking First Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. And MLA Glumac.
I'm Rick Lumac, joining you from the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and I'm the MLA for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Thanks, and all of you. And assisting the committee today are Karan Riar from the Clerk Parliamentary Committee's office and Billy Young from Hansard Services. I'd now like to introduce our guests, and I'm just going to reverse my screen. Pardon me. Our first panel is consisting of Police Victim Services of British Columbia, represented by Ian P. Beatty, the Executive Director, and Anita Islander, President and Board of Directors. And after that, the Downtown Eastside Women's Center, represented by Andrea Glickman, a board member, and the Battered Women's Support Services, Angela Marie McDougall, Executive Director. We'll have questions from committee members at 9:45, and I would ask then Mr. Beatty to present, and Ms. Islander, pardon me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to members of the Special Committee on Reforming the Police Act. It is our pleasure to appear before you this morning and look forward to engaging you both with our presentation as well as with the Q&A session. My name is Ian Beatty, and I am the Executive Director of Police Victim Services, British Columbia. Prior to starting our presentation, we would like to acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory our office stands, and specifically where we are in Greater Victoria, the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Swaznik people. And on the latter, because our office is actually on the Saanich Peninsula, would also like to extend an acknowledgement to the Sartlip, Sakem, Sayout, and Pockwitchin First Nations, whose historical relationships to the land continue to this day. In addition, PVSBC also wishes to recognize the Métis, Inuit, and urban Indigenous communities who inhabit and enrich these lands. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our board president, Ms. Anita Elander. Anita and I will be co-presenting this morning. Anita is an accomplished police victim services professional, joining us from Vernon, actually, where she is the manager of Vernon North Okanagan RCMP Victim Services. Over to Anita.
Thank you for your introduction, Ian, and good morning, members of the Special Committee. I hope you can hear me okay. I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from the northern part of the unceded Okanagan First Nation territory, and that many descendants of the Sukanakan still live here today. As a civilian professional with police-based victim services, I will refer to us as police-based throughout the rest of my presentation, or I'll try to anyway, because police-based victim services is a mouthful. I would like to begin our presentation by telling you a story using a local example about what our service is all about. The intensity of the function, what it means to work as a professional in the sector, and in victims' own words, how essential and critical the services are to the survival and well-being of the thousands of victims of crime and other traumatic situations occurring daily throughout our province. I will change some of the details of this story to protect the anonymity, sorry, I struggle over that word all the time, don't know why, of this file. And I would like to add that the supports we provided on this file would look very similar to any police-based program in the province. My office provided crisis support to 3 victims of a rural North Okanagan aggravated assault file a few years ago. The offender attempted to break into a residence using a machete, threatening to kill family members and causing extreme fear to the victims on this file. The victims hid while the offender continued to search for them and destroy property until police arrived. As the victims were hiding from the offender during the assault, they were separated from each other and did not know if the others were okay during the commission of this offense. The victims feared for their lives. The offender was arrested on scene, which saved time during the criminal justice process, as the police were able to identify the person responsible for the offense. My staff were referred the file by police, and we provided crisis response and significant continued emotional support before and throughout the criminal justice process. My staff liaised regularly with police regarding the status of the investigation, and then provided regular updates to the victims. We provided court update information to all 3 victims on this file, explaining what each court appearance meant and walking them through the complexities of the criminal justice process and providing emotional support along the way. The offender pled guilty and was sentenced to time in jail with a reporting requirement upon his release. My staff continued to provide support while the offender was in jail. They continued to fear for their safety upon their release. We assisted with safety planning and updated the plan as the situation evolved. The offender breached their conditions the day of their release. We are still providing support today as the offender continues to reoffend. The victims share that they do not feel like the criminal justice system served them because they continue to breach and reoffend and they do not feel safe. One of the victims on this file who expressed their appreciation for the support my staff offered said, "I would not have been able to go through this process without your support. I did not know where to start to create a workable safety plan. Being able to talk about what happened and how scared I was helped take the shame away and normalized my feelings and made all the difference to my recovery. Your continued support grounded me, and I didn't feel so alone knowing someone cares." By providing ongoing support to the victims on this or any file, we assist in reducing the traumatic impacts of crime and trauma on victims, witnesses, friends, and community. Back over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Anita. Very much appreciate the story. Just in terms of the order for the committee, we have prepared for you, and we understand has been provided to you, a PowerPoint deck. We will be walking through this deck, and we'll let you know the pages as we move to them throughout the process. Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to basically slide number 2. I'm not going to read our mission or vision statements, but just want to let you know that our goal as an organization is to empower and advocate for our member programs so that they are in the best position possible to ensure all victims of crime and trauma receive the utmost in compassionate, professional, and consistent services. Now going to move to slide 3, which is the slide where we'll provide a little bit of background information in regards to the organization specifically. So PVS has been representing the police-based victim services sector since 1985, when we were created as a BC society with full charitable status. Our role is to provide services to our 95 member organizations and individuals through advocacy, representations, such as appearing before you today, and lobbying for members' interests as guided by the BC Lobbyist Transparency Act. In addition, we provide a broad range of services related to education, professional development, and support for our members and also to our partners and stakeholders. PVSBC is a province-wide member organization, and as such, we regularly collaborate with a wide range of partner and stakeholder organizations who are also in the business of providing a range of support services to members of the general public as well as to victims. Not an extensive list, but those that we work most actively with include the End the Violence Association of British Columbia, the BC Association of Chiefs of Police, the Association of Municipal Chiefs of Police, as well as the BC Society of Transition Houses, the Association of BC Police Boards, and also the Federation of Community Social Services. Moving on to slide 4, we're now switching gears very clearly to now talk about the actual sector itself. So to try and put this into context, on slide 4 is information in regards to some high-level financial, human resource, and workload indicators of the sector. Financially, the investment in police-based victim services by the province and also by local governments is in excess of $8.1 million currently. Regarding staffing, there are over 275 frontline workers that utilize 2,567 weekly contracted service hours that are funded directly by the province. On an annual basis, the amount of paid hours is in the range of 115,000. Just a note, this does not include the number of hours that are funded by local governments. Regarding caseloads, there were over 50,000 clients that were provided police-based victim services in 2020, of which our data shows that approximately 18,205 of those were actually new clients. Data also indicates that of those overall number of cases, approximately or over actually 11% of those cases were related to assault, abuse, and or partner situations. This is a trend that we are noticing as well as a result of the implications of COVID. I'd like to move on to page 5. Pardon me while I flip my deck over. So just some basic information in regards to our connection to the provincial government and also where our authority flows from. So police-based victim services across the province are delivered on a contractual basis through the Ministry of Public Safety and Solicitor General, specifically the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Division. Now, this is a separate division from the Police and Security Division, who presented to you on the 29th of January and also on the 10th of February. The authority for providing victim services flows from the Canadian Victims Bill of Rights, the BC Victims Crime Act, as well as the BC Crime Victims Assistance Act. We wish to draw to your attention that police-based victim services is not currently included in the current Police Act. We consider this to be an omission, and we are going to advocate for, and we will advocate that this needs to be remedied, as you will see in our recommendations. I'm going to switch back to Anita so she can provide you a quick overview of where we are in the province. Anita?
Thank you, Ian. So we are now moving on to slide 6, which is the map slide. So we're now going to start drilling down on the particulars about the police-based victim services sector. As you can see from the map, the sector is embedded in either municipal or RCMP locations in virtually every city, town, and village across the province. Local police-based victim services workers have an integral partnership with police in providing a wide range of services to victims in the immediate aftermath of a crime or other serious incident when trauma initially starts and in many cases continues for lengthy periods of time. I am pleased to indicate that each committee member has a solid police-based victim services organization in your local community.
Thanks, Anita. So I'm just going to very quickly talk about the diagram that is on slide number 7. So this is our partner and stakeholder diagram. So to function effectively on the front line, all police-based victim services programs have a well-developed network of partner and stakeholder agencies who they both work with and support, mainly within the public safety, medical communities, and community service disciplines. Depending on the specific case, the sector works with many, if not all of these organizations, who are integral to ensuring victims receive timely, compassionate, and essential ongoing service so that they can effectively navigate all parts of their journey to recovery, hope, and certainty. I'm passing back to Anita now to run through the functions of police-based victim services. Anita?
Okay, so we are now on slide 8 in your package, a little bit of background on the critical incident response. So victim services staff are called by police to attend the scenes of many types of traumatic situations, and they may include scenes such as homicides, homicide-suicide files, next of kin notifications, suicide files, domestic or sexual assaults, fatal motor vehicle or boating accidents, missing person files, assaults, drug overdoses, child deaths, etc. The police's role is investigational, and our role is to ensure that victims are supported and have access to information. We walk alongside a victim as they go through the trauma process, providing trauma-informed support as long as needed. How victims cope largely depends on their experience immediately following the traumatic incident. Timely connection to victim services has a more positive impact on the healing outcomes of victims. Now moving on to slide 9. There is an integral partnership between police-based and police. Police referral to victim services in the immediate aftermath of a crime, providing victims with the information about their rights to information, protection, participation, and restitution in the criminal justice system can make an enormous difference to victims' collision with the criminal justice system. Unsupported victims are less likely to come forward. When victims are not treated as full partners in the criminal justice system, the system is less effective. Staying connected with victims from when the crime occurred to and through the criminal justice process, staying connected with victims from when the crime occurred to and through the criminal justice process is so important for the chance of a successful court outcome. And maybe even more importantly, the survivability through the system and resilience created moving past the case. Not only do these actions provide for better healing and recovery outcomes for victims, they also carry a strong message of social solidarity. This last comment was a quote taken from the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights Progress Report. Police-based staff provide invaluable, inclusive, confidential, unbiased, and respectful support and advocacy for crime victims in so many ways. Example, helping victims understand their rights, offering information, support, and guidance through the criminal justice system. And victim services staff also help prepare victims for court appearances, provide emotional support and understanding of criminal justice processes. We may also continue to provide support long after a trial process, as we provide support through parole board or review board hearings, and we may provide support for many years after a crime has occurred. Now moving on to slide 10. Police-based have a strong collaborative relationship with many community and partner agencies, as reflected in slide 7. We are key members on leadership teams and committees to provide subject matter expertise in the areas of examples, sexual and domestic violence, threat assessment and management, developing and implementing best practices, education and community awareness, and prevention strategies. We regularly provide public education and awareness in community regarding victim issues. Although we primarily support victims through the criminal justice system, there is often overlap with family court proceedings. Court processes can be a time of increased risk, therefore safety planning during this time is extremely important. We may also provide emotional support during family court proceedings and refer to resources such as legal aid, duty counsel, or family justice counselors. We also assist to explain protection orders and assist our clients or victims in obtaining copies of existing protection orders. Now moving on to slide 11. Safety planning may be provided for a number of reasons. And they may be provided for files such as home invasion files, break and enters, neighbor disputes, homicide files, domestic violence, criminal harassment, or any situation where someone does not feel safe at home or in community or has fear of another person. We liaise with police regularly to ensure that safety plans are current and effective. We play a key role in creating safety plans, and we work closely with police on files that are classified as highest risk. We also facilitate home security checks if required. Now moving on to slide 12. And this is talking about our recommendations. So on behalf of the board, of our board of directors, our members, and most importantly, all people in our communities in BC who have been victimized by crime and similar events, whose lives are now traumatized, we make the following recommendations to you in your efforts to revise the British Columbia Police Act into a modern, inclusive, and solution-oriented roadmap. We recommend, number 1, to prioritize police-based victim services into the Police Act as a specialized, proactive service embedded in centralized police detachments and departments. This must include police-based victim services and its workers being included as defined terms within legislation. And number 2, embedding victim rights and key solutions consistent with the Canadian Victim Bill of Rights and the BC Victim of Crime Act within the spectrum of policing functions in the Police Act. So in closing, without police-based victim services being added to the Police Act, we believe that victims' rights will never be fully recognized. We provide invaluable assistance and advocacy. We are an essential service and a critical part of the continuum of policing services and the criminal justice system. We believe that adding police-based victim services to the Police Act is required to ensure that the legal rights of victims is respected. Connection to police-based victim services at the onset of a crime or traumatic event has a positive impact on recovery and resiliency. Adding police-based victim services to the Police Act is taking a firm stand to say that victims matter. By formally adding victims into the Act, it puts the marginalized and underserved back into the room. The more victims can be recognized, the more my colleagues and myself can do our jobs. Victims must not be an afterthought. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Mr. Chair, this concludes our presentation. Our apologies, we ran, I see, about 4 minutes over. And we look forward to listening to and engaging the committee. So our thanks for being able to participate.
Thank you, and we will extend the time for our next presenters so that they get their 15 minutes. The Downtown Eastside Women's Center, represented by Andrea Glickman, board member. Andrea, could you take over?
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much. My name is Andrea Glickman, and it is my honor and privilege to be speaking to you today on behalf of the Downtown Eastside Women's Center in my capacity as board member. My diasporic ancestors are Guyanese, Portuguese, Indian, and Eastern European Jewish, and I am an uninvited and first-generation settler on Turtle Island. I would like to acknowledge the members of the committee today and also my fellow presenters. I'll begin with a territorial acknowledgement. We are extremely and forever grateful to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations for hosting the Downtown Eastside Women's Center shelter and drop-in centers in their unceded, unsurrendered, and ancestral territories, and for continuing to generously support the women who use Duke. I'm joining you today from the unceded, unsurrendered, and ancestral territories of the Shizel Nation, and I'm very humbled to carry out this business on their land. Duke produced a seminal submission into the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, which was called Red Women Rising, Indigenous Women Survivors in the Downtown Eastside, and which explores how individual experiences of violence are inseparable from state violence, including loss of land, forced poverty, homelessness, child apprehension, criminalization within the justice system, and health disparities. Indigenous women comprise 70% of the women accessing Duke. We therefore stand with Indigenous peoples whose territories comprise what is now known as British Columbia, and we fully support restitution and having their stolen land given back as part of the critical work that must be done to fully end violence against Indigenous women and girls. The Women's Center began in 1978. The mission of Duke is to provide a safe and non-judgmental environment for women from all walks of life who live and or work in the Downtown Eastside. To achieve this goal, we provide supportive surroundings with meals, counseling, advocacy, and programs which nurture and empower our members, including shelter beds. Our community also works towards increasing awareness of systemic injustice and inequalities that contribute to women's vulnerability. One of our goals is to bring awareness of poverty and violence issues to the general public and to government. Women have been victimized and have not had their safety needs met, and measures must be taken to close that gap. Your committee is intended to consider reforms related to the modernization and sustainability of policing under the Police Act, the role of police with respect to complex social issues, including mental health and wellness, addictions and harm reduction, the scope of systemic racism within BC's police agencies, and whether there are measures necessary to ensure a modernized Police Act is consistent with the UN Declaration. Duke's interest in policing goes back more than 30 years of dealing with police and reporting missing women to the VPD. Our focus on the safety and security of women, and particularly Indigenous, Black, and women of color who are disproportionately impacted by the police and comprise the majority of Duke's members, has driven us to put together this presentation. To put it plainly, women are vulnerable to violence in many forms, and the women who use Duke are often at heightened risk of violence based on many intersecting factors, including identity, poverty, health issues, and occupation. The rates of violence against Indigenous women, girls, trans, and Two-Spirit people are disturbingly high and represent one of the most critical, glaring, and ongoing human rights issues in Canada and in British Columbia. Many women who use Duke and many women in the downtown Eastside are over-policed, putting them into further risk of violence and harm by then needing to carry out their daily activities in riskier and more isolated spaces. As detailed in the Opal Inquiry into and in the final report of the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry, the VPD failed to prevent and protect Indigenous women from violence and failed to diligently investigate violence when it occurred. Again, Duke directly experienced this absolute failure in policing through decades of reporting missing women to the police and not seeing action or support. While the Opal Inquiry had poor scope and leadership, it did confirm that the police did not listen to women in the downtown Eastside, and it was a blatant failure of duty. It concluded almost 10 years ago, and there's been no review to determine if all the issues have been addressed. The Police Act is legislation empowering individuals working for the state to carry weapons that can kill, injure, restrain, arrest, interrogate, and stop women. And so we are extremely interested in contributing to this review and revision of the Police Act. We're not a well-resourced organization, and our capacity is focused entirely on providing frontline service to women and children. To be honest, we expect our input to be taken seriously, and we expect to see our recommendations implemented because the lives of the women who use Duke are literally at stake. The gruesome murder of a Coast Salish mother in 1992 catalyzed the annual Women's Memorial March, which continues years later to honor the lives of missing and murdered Indigenous women and all women's lives lost in the downtown Eastside. Many homicides and disappearances are still unresolved, including the recent murders and disappearances of Duke members Lisa Arlene Francis, Angeline Pete, Ashley Machiznik, and Verna Simard. We also want to note Chelsea Poorman, who's missing, and currently there are vigils being organized, and Tanya Heyer, who was murdered more recently. The recommendations we will make center the enhanced safety of women and children, accountability of police, addressing and ending systemic racism through legislative tools, a legislated review system to audit police funding and commit to reduce funding for police to address issues that would be better addressed by professionals trained in mental health and in harm reduction. Our first recommendation is that the legislation must specifically be revised to explicitly keep women and children safe. We categorically object to the police killing anyone, including women and children. Chantel Moore, a much-loved Tlaoquiat mother, daughter, granddaughter, was killed last year by the RCMP in Edmundston, New Brunswick, when she called 911 and they came for a wellness check. Every legislative tool must be used to ensure that the state-sanctioned murder or abuse of women and children is not permitted. It has been suggested that health officials accompany or replace police on health checks. Number 2, include legislative provisions to address and prohibit systemic racism in the police system, including a complete, absolute end to police stops and street checks. We know that women of color, and particularly Indigenous and Black women, face higher rates of incarceration and police stops. We need collection of race-based data and funding to fully assess and address systemic racism within the policing system in BC, perhaps in concert with the BC Human Rights Commissioner. Additionally, the Police Act must be reformed so that it is categorically clear that racism is not permitted. We called for creation of a provision that would make reporting racism by police officers mandatory and include clear consequences, because systemic racism can lead to harm to women and even to death. It is not something that can be addressed through cultural competency training. As Teresa Gray says in Red Women Rising, quote, "The police should be held responsible for not taking violence against women seriously and for not doing their job," end quote. Recommendation 3 is that the special committee should read Red Women Rising in its entirety in order to understand the context of Indigenous women survivors in the downtown Eastside, and should incorporate all recommendations, and particularly recommendations with respect to policing. On April 3rd, Duke released Red Women Rising, based on the lived experience, leadership, and expertise of Indigenous survivors. This comprehensive report is the culmination of a participatory process with 113 Indigenous women and 15 non-Indigenous women regarding the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The report was co-authored by Carol Martin and Harsha Walia. The stories are organized thematically, and there is a specific section on policing, prisons, and the justice system. The following contributors to Red Women Rising have died from the violence of poverty, the violence of addiction, and inadequate medical services in the past year. These include Corinne Demas, known as CD, Sandra Marie Sonia Chechak, and I apologize for the last name being slightly pronounced wrong, Sophie Morasti, Stella August, Beatrice Starr, Audrey Hill, Melinda Melting Tallow, and Karen Boyd. I'm going to highlight some of the key recommendations from Red Women Rising in an attempt to bring forward the voices of women themselves who use the center. We recommend that administrative, disciplinary, or criminal measures are available to hold officials accountable when officers are found to have failed to act on reports of missing women or have carried out biased or inadequate investigations of violence against Indigenous women. This should contain the responsibility of housing organizations and police to act on their safety protocols in relation to missing women. Communications between police, family, and housing organizations should be transparent and coordinated. We call for a review and repair of police policies and procedures that are conducive to violence against Indigenous women, girls, trans, and Two-Spirit people. We recommend providing Indigenous women, their families, and community advocates with an available and effective procedure to file complaints in the case of non-compliance or negligence by officials, and information on how to initiate and pursue that procedure. We call for the prohibition of police from carrying and using all lethal weapons. That's no guns. Even in the most escalated scenario, there is no justification for a police-involved lethal shooting. We call for the legislation of the elimination of the use of police restraint devices, such as the hobble restraint device and the use of police dogs as weapons. We demand elimination of searches and monitoring of Indigenous women and girls by male police officers and of all women and girls. All police forces must be mandated to implement sex work enforcement guidelines similar to those in Vancouver that support the safety of sex workers in police interactions. In reforming the Police Act, we call on the province to make it easier to file a police complaint and establish an independent civilian watchdog that conducts investigations of reported incidents of serious police misconduct, including allegations of police violence and sexual assault. You must increase the liability for the misconduct of police officers to include criminal charges. We call to allow the Provincial Office of the Police Complaint Commissioner to initiate its own systemic investigations or hearings and shift investigations of misconduct within the jurisdiction of the Police Complaint Commissioner to investigations directly by the Commissioner. We also call for the implementation of existing recommendations by the Human Rights Watch in their report, Those Who Take Us Away, as well as recommendations by the Aboriginal Justice Implementation Commission and from the report Justice Reform for BC. Our fourth recommendation is that the special committee should review the calls for justice in their entirety and implement the calls that are related to policing and to women's safety in revising the Police Act. I'd like to note that the commissioners themselves note that the recommendations are legal imperatives and they're not optional. Key recommendations include police training, education, transparency, and accountability, and doing so in partnership with Indigenous peoples, and the creation of a national task force with provincial participation to open up and investigate all 193 unsolved cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Recommendation 5, and I only have 6, is we call for a thorough and systematic review of police financing and budgets and a reallocation of non-police related work. The Police Act must include a legislative review system to audit police funding on a regular basis and must commit to continually reducing funding for police to address issues that would be better addressed by professionals trained in areas such as mental health and harm reduction. This must be built into any reform. Money that is currently spent on police delivering services they are not trained to deliver would be better spent providing housing and food and other critical community needs that are severely underfunded and which, in their absence, increase the likelihood of engagement with police. Recommendation 6 is, as per the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, The province must ensure that any revised Police Act is aligned with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Article 22 of the Declaration states that particular attention shall be paid to the rights and special needs of Indigenous elders, women, youth, children, and persons with disabilities in the implementation of the Declaration, and that states shall take measures in conjunction with Indigenous peoples to ensure that Indigenous women and children enjoy the full protection and guarantees against all forms of violence and discrimination. We call for an independent, gender-based, and Indigenous analysis of the Police Act and any proposed changes to the Police Act. Indigenous women must be involved in this analysis. First Nations, as the proper title and rights holders, must have the opportunity to review a consultation draft of the draft bill prior to introduction, and they must be given the powers to recommend any changes. Full alignment as per the Declaration Act must be done in partnership with First Nations. In closing, the Downtown Eastside Women's Centre is a unique and special place because of the women who use it and direct it. I would like to conclude by acknowledging the strength, brilliance, and vibrancy of all the women at Duke, and to thank the women at Duke for giving me the opportunity to bring forward the voices of the women today. I also want to thank our Executive Director, Alice Kendall, and all the staff who work so hard every single day at the direction of Duke members to create much needed safe spaces for women in the downtown East Side. It is our collective responsibility to do everything that we can to keep women and children safe, and it is our hope that you will center this responsibility as you reform the Police Act. We call on the police to find our missing women and solve their murders. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our next presenter is from the Battered Women's Support Services, Angela Marie McDougall, and she is the Executive Director. Please go ahead, Angela.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee. My name is Angela Marie McDougall, and I'm the Executive Director of Battered Women's Support Services, and it's an honor to join you here today in these unceded and unsurrendered ancestral territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. I have been in the role of Executive Director for 18 years, and I'm here to talk about the work of Battered Women's Support Services, the work that Battered Women's Support Services has been part of in police reform, and then also to talk about some recommendations that we would like to see that the committee would consider seriously. Firstly, I want to acknowledge all of the thousands of women that have accessed our services over the 43 years that we've been in existence. And as an organization that was created in 1979 with the purposes of ending gender-based violence, we've been providing frontline work through a number of different services, crisis line, counseling services, victim services, and specialized support for women that are Indigenous, Black, Latin American. We have a legal advocacy program that works to support areas of the law and where the law interfaces with gender-based violence. As one of 60 community-based victim service programs in British Columbia, throughout the province, Battered Women's Support Services is one of the first. And we have a long history of examining the relationship of gender-based violence and the law, and in particular, the ways in which police interface with women that are dealing with gender-based violence, including domestic violence, sexualized violence, criminal harassment, and sexual harassment. Our work in law reform and in police reform specifically has spanned over 30 years and began with the very beginning of the creation of the victim service program, the community-based victim service programs within British Columbia, and the continued with the work around the development of the Violence Against Women in Relationships policy, which guides police response to domestic violence when arriving at the scene, as well as sexualized violence police policies. And we have continued that work through the creation of Canada's very first domestic violence unit, which was created in the 1990s, that continues to operate within the Vancouver Police Department. We have been part of the development and informing the training, both the online training formats that exist in present day, and we were a part of the creation of the primary aggressive policy and that the language in the policy comes directly from the writings of Janet Freeman, who was our legal advocate, and that language comes from a document that she wrote while our legal advocate called The Myth of Mutual Battering. We have worked quite a long time with transit police and looking at sexualized violence and sexual offending on public transportation. And as well, we were a part of the creation of a community committee called Sister Watch that was developed in collaboration with community members within the Downtown Eastside and with Vancouver Police Department after the killing of and the suspicious death of Ashley Michisnik, who my beloved colleague Andrea Glickman, representing Downtown Eastside Women's Center, has referenced already today. We are very much a part of the address. We've been working with police to look at their response and also various policies, but also around training. And we've been part of consultation and implementation of cultural safety training within policing, within British Columbia. And our work began to take a more focused effort in looking at the ways in which police have been responding to specifically gender-based violence and domestic violence within British Columbia, and that we began to notice how police began to use the policies that we work so hard to develop to disadvantage women, where we began to see about 14 years ago the increases of women who have been wrongfully arrested by the police for allegedly perpetrating domestic violence. And we began then a process of filing complete police complaints, both with municipal police as well as RCMP, as we became very concerned that police were then interpreting policies that were designed for women and children's safety now to the detriment of women. And what we began to notice anecdotally, and we're currently now in the process of evaluating through creating a research on this, is the extent those women that were wrongfully arrested by the police were disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and women of color who were immigrant women whose first language was not English, and that they spoke with an accent and perhaps, and combined. So we began to look at the relationship to how race was informing police response when arriving at domestic violence situations. We're also at this point very attuned to what is a troubling reality around police involved in domestic violence. And that we've had some high profile cases here within Vancouver and within Abbotsford, but also in other regions of British Columbia, where members of law enforcement have come to the attention of the criminal system through domestic violence with their partners, their female partners, who may or may not also be members of law enforcement. Our work today then is we're really examining how we've spent considerable time in working around police reform, and in a number of different ways, and evaluating to the extent to which that's been effective. And we're noticing some very concerning shifts that have, in part, I think, due to policing, but also in the context of some other larger issues, which are how policing interfaces with changes in legislation, such as the R versus Jordan decision that came in, I believe, 2016 within the Supreme Court of Canada. And what we are noticing, unfortunately, is that though we have been at various times encouraged by changes in police reform and various kinds of policies that we've been able to see, and then how that then becomes deployed, is that we continue to see, and increasingly so, troubling responses by police when they arrive at domestic violence circumstances, where they tend to not follow the very policies that have been created for that and that are designed to guide them to perform proper investigations. And we believe that this is in part due to longstanding and troubling challenges within policing. That is about the organizational culture of police, and the struggle that patrol officers have to be able to perform their duties based on their own interpretation of violence against women, gender-based violence. And what that means in thinking about reform is that the challenge that we have in creating words to describe what is effective policing, when a lot of the challenges remain within the culture of policing itself. And these are well established. They've been reported in some very considerable reports that have looked at sexualized violence within the RCMP against their own members, as well as what my colleague Andrea Glickman referred to, the long-standing and troubling problematic policing, looking at the disappearances and deaths of Indigenous women specifically, as well as sex workers within Vancouver's Downtown Eastside, and also the relationship to the disappearances and deaths of Indigenous women through what we understand as the Highway of Tears, and as well through the north coast and northwest of British Columbia. And these problems are though they've been evaluated in part through the Wally Opal Commission of inquiry on missing and murdered women within British Columbia, but also Canada's national inquiry on the disappearances and killings of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. And there are recommendations that have been drawn on police reform with respect to missing people and with cultural issues within policing through all three of those reports, both of those reports, I should say, and combined with Red Women Rising, which has a number of very key and vital recommendations that I think that I would recommend that the special committee review. We would want then to see, any process around reforming police would then need to evaluate to what extent the recommendations that have already been tabled have made their way through the system to this point. It is difficult, of course, after many years of providing insights into policing and reform to see some of the kind of ongoing challenges in what remains to be within the cultural framework of policing. We would agree and echo with our colleagues at the Downtown Eastside Women's Centre around incorporating practices and that would then hold individual police accountable for their lack of following the policies that currently exist. That's with respect to disappearances and the deaths of women, but it's also with respect to sexualized violence and domestic violence. If we had more time today, I would be able to share with you hundreds of ways in which we've seen police not follow the very policies of which they are designed to follow that would be